if you don't recognize in your leadership that the human beings in and around you, regardless of what type of business you're running, have more than hands, but they have hearts and heads as well, you're not going to optimize your system until you tap into those.
You are listening to 5 a.m. podcast. Your morning motivation starts here.
Welcome back to the 5 a.m. podcast. I'm your host, Michael Klassen. Thank you for being here. Now, our guest today started her career on the factory floor at just 17 and went on to lead multi-million-dollar global operations, including serving as Global Director of Manufacturing, Assembly, and Test for Rolls-Royce Defense. She's an independent board director, a Woman in Manufacturing Hall of Fame inductee, and the Shingo Prize-winning co-author of Steel Toes and Stilettos. Her new book, More is Better, is a playbook for leaders who want culture to drive results, not drama. Please join me in welcoming to the 5 a.m. podcast, Kathy Miller. Kathy, welcome to the cast.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Yes, it's great to have you here. So let's dive right into those work boots and concrete floors that you got to experience in the manufacturing industry at the age of 17. Can you maybe share a story with us that would have shaped that experience of how you view leadership and real work today?
Yeah, absolutely. So many stories from so many decades.
Yes.
But I'll tell you a little bit about my origin story.
Sure.
That will help you understand what really carried me through many companies and many positions of leadership. So, as you stated, I started on the plant floor at the age of 17. I was a co-op student, an industrial engineering co-op student with General Motors. I went to a co-op school. It's now called Kettering University, but it was a very practical, very technical college where when you graduated 5 years in, you had 2.5 years of experience because you rotated 3 months at school, 3 months at your job. So I started in vehicle assembly, which was a bit of a rough environment for a young lady back in those days. But, once I got over sort of the shock of the environment, I really came to love vehicle assembly and the fact that every 60 seconds a functioning vehicle came off the end of that line. And I loved the sights and the sounds and really the people who, despite their tough exteriors, were really, really wonderful individuals. And when I graduated 5 years into it, the plant closed down after 50 years of operation. And that was a very significant emotional event for me. I followed the last car down the line with some of the biggest, burliest, loudest, toughest men you would ever want to meet. And they were reduced to tears as they were really grappling with, what's my identity? How am I going to support my family? And so at a very early age, I saw the impact that business has, beyond the metrics, to the individual, to their families, to the community that it operated in. And at that time, it was such a significant emotional event for me that I just made a vow that if I ever had the chance to lead a plant, to lead my own business, that I wanted to make it so strong that the people in the plant, their children, their grandchildren could have the opportunity to work there if they so chose. So, that really formed my view on leadership and the accountability and responsibility that it bears to the humans that get the work done.
Yes. And that makes me think back to a conversation I had with Erica D'Arcangelo about the generational pizza restaurant that her grandfather started, who had been a coal miner and had a goal and a vision for something that would be generational. And so thinking back to those early years of your career and your education of engineering, and certainly, our education helps us to view life with a certain lens. And so as you were learning engineering and you were on the assembly line and you were seeing all this engineering that made your job possible, did you kind of maybe extrapolate that to the human factor around you as well, of how the people were fitting into the man-made engineering to create these products?
Absolutely. So first of all, I was an industrial engineer. So that's the people and process side
Okay.
of engineering. So, I wasn't electrical or mechanical designing products. I was helping to not necessarily design, but improve the processes and the systems and, the methods that people were using. So I was very tied into the human element very early on. And I will tell you, the plant, although it was a large facility, was one of the smaller ones. So there were no other young ladies
Right.
in the plant. I was the only female student there. And so I really had to forge strong relationships with people, the people on the line, the people in leadership, the people in the union to survive and thrive there. And so I really, my dad had always brought me up to believe that everybody puts their pants on the same way. And, whether you're a ditch digger, bank president, that everyone deserves dignity, respect. People have families at home. So I never, really bought into the union versus management, historical
Right.
issues. And I really survived and thrived in that environment because of the relationships that I made along the way there.
Yeah, and those relationships are key. And I think one of those components of success is navigating those stormy waters or stormy weather of that relationship between unionized staff and the corporation or staff. And oftentimes we can get so focused in on the component in this larger picture
Mhm.
that we're at, kind of looking at that one small corner of that lithograph or that painting. And how how did you see an opportunity maybe for you to have maybe assembly line worker or somebody in the process to realize that they're actually part of something much greater and they have so much value?
Yeah. Well, in those early days, I don't know that I had the opportunity to do that until
Right.
I really got to lead my own organization. I always made people, if I was working on improving a job on the line, feel like they were the most important part of that system. And I always tapped into them for the ideas that would make it
Smart.
better instead of just
Yeah.
deciding it on my own based on my fancy education, you
Right.
know?
Yes.
So I think I learned that early and, making cars is a pretty visible thing. So you have all
Hmm.
these components come together and they go off the line. Where it got a little trickier for me was when I was leading operations where you're second or third tier to the end product. So for rubber products, say, you know, they go in so many things, but the people who are making them every day may or may not know how they were actually serving our customers and making the world a better place. So, when I got to operations like that, I made sure that I brought in the salespeople and customers and the people who were relying on us doing well to tell them how their work connected with a bigger purpose.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's so important to know the value and the part that we get to play in the process. Now, then when you moved on from that in industrial engineering into the multi-million dollar executive roles at GM or Parker Hannifin or Rolls-Royce even, was there a biggest culture shock you experienced moving up that ladder?
I think that it was interesting to me as I moved up the ladder how many things people tried to solve in conference rooms instead of where the work actually takes place. So I think that was really interesting to me because having grown up on that concrete, that's where the
Right,
action happens. And I remember sitting in so many meetings about how are we going to improve quality? How are we going to improve safety?
right.
And just thinking, why don't we go look at where that happens, and see what could go wrong? And I did that a lot when I with my own teams. But you do sit in a lot of strategic meetings that rely on your experience in those places. I just always love to connect back to where the work took place when it was possible.
Right. Yeah, and that it's great to have that the synergy of those two cultures coming together. Then in part of this, it would be hitting numbers. So hitting numbers for safety or profitability or production. And you've noted that doing that is never just a technical problem, but it's a leadership problem. And so for some, this might cut a little close to home, but why do you think maybe there's many intelligent leaders and they're trying to solve human problems with technical solutions?
Right. Well, first of all, a lot of people who lead have technical backgrounds. So that's where they are most familiar, or financial backgrounds. So they're analyzing the output of these technical and human systems.
Right. Yes.
But if the humans who are doing the value added work don't buy into technical solutions, it's really hard to reap the benefits of them in many cases. So I just think it's also what people are exposed to as well. So if you grew up in a command and control environment where the plant manager had to know everything and make all the decisions, that's going to be your frame of reference unless you've been exposed to something else. So I think that, sometimes people just default to what they're naturally good at. So I
Hmm.
don't think it's any bad intentions on anyone's part. But if you don't recognize in your leadership that the human beings in and around you, regardless of what type of business you're running, have more than hands, but they
Hmm.
have hearts and heads as well, you're not going to optimize your system until you tap into those.
Right. Yeah, so important to remember those very key components. I have to put that maybe in a KPI somehow. But do you have a story to show what it looks like when smart leaders might be doing all the right things on paper, but they've ignored that human emotion component of the system?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I've been in hundreds and hundreds of plants worldwide. And you can tell the ones where the culture is working for the business versus working against it. No, it's very clear if people look you in the eye when you're visiting, if they smile, if they're allowed to speak and tell you about their operation versus, the executives doing it. There's so many cues on that. And what I would say is, depending on the technology, depending on the market that you're in, you could have very good numbers and people might not even recognize that there's even more. And so I often inherited operations at different levels that were built on those more traditional premises. But when I would come in and try to communicate with them about how the business was doing and that sort of thing, honestly, were super skeptical at first. It looked great in the textbooks. You got to communicate, you got to do it consistently. But the people who do the doing sometimes are pretty skeptical of the next leader and their program of the month, and can they outlast them till the next person comes through. What makes Kathy different than the last guy. And it takes time and it looks a little different. And it looks a little different in industrial settings versus professional settings.
Yes. Now, perhaps part of your experience, it certainly sounds like you were able to be a protege with a mentor. Can you talk about the maybe some of the shoulders that of those giants that you stood on your way through your career?
Oh my gosh. I had so many amazing allies and mentors, Michael, and I could not have experienced some of the executive positions I did without people who reached into the organization and saw something in me and gave me development opportunities from the very beginning. One story that I tell, and sometimes it makes my younger listeners a little uncomfortable, but it was very much a different environment back in the
Hmm.
day than it is now.
Yes.
It just was, and I had to hang in there so I could make it better for, the younger
It's true.
generations.
Yes.
But they're like, "Why did you put up with that?" I'm like, "Because I would be unemployed if I didn't." It's not
Hmm.
like that anymore, and I'm so happy it's not, the things that aren't tolerated.
Yes.
But, I was probably 20 years old and I was working in a production department as a coordinator. And there was this group of women in the soft trim department and they called me over. And I was so excited because they had just ignored me before. I'm like, oh, maybe they're starting to like me. And then they showed me something in a box that was super offensive. And I laughed and walked away, but then I was devastated because they were just wanted to laugh at my expense. They weren't really accepting me. And I went back into my superintendent's office and, I was pretty emotional about it. I just felt rejected and sad. And, he asked me what had happened. I told him. He kind of chuckled because he was like, that has you this upset, because he was very used to that environment. And he told me, he said, Kathy, if you are ever going to make it in this business, you cannot wear your heart on your shirt sleeve. People will see that as weakness, and you must never, ever cry at work. And, that's also a very controversial statement. But what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is people invested in me with the best of their advice and what they knew, to help me really cope and really thrive. And he was just the first mentor that I had, but so many along the way, mostly informal, sometimes formal mentoring programs.
Okay.
But yeah, so many amazing people along the way.
It's wonderful to hear. And we always get that kind of that yin and yang in the office of those who are going to be for us and those they seem a little bit against us. But could you also maybe talk about identifying those opportunities that come our way for development? There might be some young people listening. We do have that in our demographics of people that are working their way up the corporate ladders and the workplaces. But how can they identify what is a great development opportunity that they might not recognize that gift?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the very best thing you can do for your career is to do a great job that you're in. So many of the young people I mentor are what's next, what's next, what's next. And I say, you have to earn your right to what's next. You have to really own what you have and be passionate about that. But I'll tell you a story that happened to me. So I, grew up in the plant, moved to an electronics business, went into engineering and marketing, and I just really missed the operational environment. So I went back and I was a superintendent of pressure sensors and using all of these techniques that I, had studied for so long and observed what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do. I really took those departments to new levels of performance. And so I was doing really well. And I got called in one day and they said, Kathy, we're taking you out of pressure sensors. We are going to put you on the lean manufacturing team. And I was devastated, Michael. I was like, I thought I was doing a good job. Why are you sidelining me? And they're like, no, we have hired all the people who have written the books. This is a great developmental opportunity for you. And, this is kind of going to be your make or break situation. If you can adopt this, learn this, apply this, you're going to be able to go to new levels of leadership. So my advice is say yes to some of those opportunities that don't look like, the next level of pay, the next level of promotion, because from that, I created a whole new career. I was still in operations, but not only could I lead operations directly, I could help others improve their operations to new heights. And, I wrote a book about lean and I got to learn from Jim Womack and John Shook. There were so many opportunities in that had I turned it down, it would have been a very different career trajectory. One time I was asked to help create a mentoring program. It wasn't in my line of responsibilities. And yes, it created more effort, more time for me at work to get my work done and do those sorts of things. But when someone approaches you and taps you on the shoulder and says, we really need help with this, say yes. You don't know where it's going to go. People are having conversations. Higher level people are having conversations about you and your career and what developmental opportunities you need to thrive. So give them a chance. By the same token, someone tapped me on the shoulder and was like, we want you to come and be a packaging engineer. And I was like, I love our packaging engineers. Packaging is so important, but not something that matches with my skill set. I appreciate you see that I contribute to the organization, but that's not the right place. So, know your strengths and build on those and say yes to the opportunities that come along that,
Yes.
may
Yeah,
expose you to something new that you hadn't planned on.
Right. I like that. And thinking back to my younger years before and after college, I saw a lot of people whose main emphasis was on the dollars per hour or the salary. They would go from one job to the next, never giving that first or second organization an opportunity to push them up through the system. Can you talk a little bit about making that choice early on in your career of not just going after the dollars, but looking for the opportunity and the momentum that someone might bring your way?
That is super important. And I always recommend that people get a lot of cross functional experience earlier in their career rather than later. Even if it's a lateral move, when you have a resume that says, I worked in purchasing and I was an operations supervisor, and as you move up, you can take on bigger organizations quicker because you have experienced a lot of different things at the ground level that, may not look like you're moving up, but later are just invaluable to how you can contribute to the organization and how you're recognized. So I think that's very important. When I was early in my career, I usually recommended about 3 years. The first year, you're really getting in, knowing what it is you have to do. The second year, you're making decisions, improving things, and having good responsibilities. In the third year, you get to learn how well those decisions really pan out. And when you're young in your career, people give you rope. They give you experiences to try things, to possibly fail in the right cultures. And as long as you learn your lessons from that, those are the most invaluable experiences you can have. And I always tell people, if you're in an industrial company, if you make products, you should try to get a job in direct line supervision where the products are made earlier rather than later, because that is one of the criteria to be a VP of ops or a manufacturing superintendent, is that you have had experience in those environments.
Right. Yes, that makes so much sense. And then I think a question related to this then is, how do you or do you protect your individual identity and vision within being part of this larger corporation, serving the corporation so that you can move up and bring value to something, but then not lose our individual vision of ourselves?
So my advice on that is to know your strengths. Take all the assessments you're offered, take all the free ones online, learn where your strengths are and play to your strengths. As a society and in many big corporations, it's always about what you could do better. Where are the gaps? How can you continue to develop and improve? And I love that, but you have to recognize that you have strengths to help you do that. So play to your strengths and be who you are, but you have to recognize the reality of the situation that you're in. So, there were times that I wasn't the most comfortable in certain situations, but I can also say that at the end of the day, I was always able to look myself in the mirror and say, I did the very best that I could do in that situation without compromising who I am.
Yeah, that's good. And maybe you have a story for us of yourself or someone that you were working with who identified that they kind of discovered more of their personal strengths, where they had an opportunity to stick to their guns or to learn something new and to move into something that really catapulted them forward for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the stories that motivates my book writing is I became general manager for a rubber parts division. And the very first event that I got to go to was a service award and dinner. And so I was meeting all these people, and then everybody who was being recognized, their leader gave a little talk about them. And there was this one 40-year-old teammate who got up and was being recognized. And his leader, his team leader, gave a speech about him. And his team leader he had like a tie on, he had like dress pants, but then like sort of like a sweatshirt over it, a zip up hoodie. And you're just listening to these talks and you're like, okay, how many more? It's a
Yes.
long day. And he gave the most articulate, heartfelt speech I had ever heard. And I was like, I got to figure out what's going on with this guy. He is amazing. So I went back into the plant. He was a team leader and he sort of dressed and blended in with this environment. And I got to know him better. And I was like, he's amazing. He's a tinkering auto mechanic outside of work. He just contributes in the way, like, he's a silent hero. He's not like waiting for the big fires to hit and then, oh, look what I did. He's just quietly going about his business and making the business better every day. So I started to pour into him, Michael. So I let him lead tours. I sent him to leadership training, problem solving training, just all sorts of little things. I saw in him things he couldn't see in himself. And that's the best part of leadership. So he just continued to excel. And I was able to promote him to a supervisor and a business unit manager and all those things. And one time I sent him a note and I was like, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations. And he wrote me a note back that has never, ever left me. And he said, Kathy, before you came, the little people would have remained the little people. And so I thank you. And that just struck me so much. There are no little people. There are, if you're worried about, can I do this job? Can I, you're not a little person. You should not be ignored. You should have the opportunity to contribute at the best of your abilities. You need to know what those strengths are and you need to play to them and, make a difference in the lives around you, whether you're in a leadership position or not. Help people see they have strengths and how you appreciate them. You would be so surprised what that does to unlock potentials in others.
Yes. Well, that's very thought-provoking and encouraging too for us as we're listening. Sometimes we can really get bogged down into that old song, Living for the Weekend, which I heard when I was much younger. And I thought, whoa, what a depressing way to live. I have 5 out of my 7 days at work, or, someone might be on shift work and they are 7 and 7 or 4 and 4. So as someone that I came to the realization that I needed to enjoy life every day, and I had to not have this disdain, let's say, for work, and not just getting one's hands dirty or moving, widget A over to widget B and assembling them together. Can you talk maybe about the joy and satisfaction that we can use to reframe what we might have considered drudgery?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to take your work very seriously, but it doesn't have to be drudgery. And, as leaders, it's our responsibility to create those cultures where people can feel that they're giving at their best. And they understand that when I move widget A to station B, eventually that's going to end up in a air conditioner for a children's hospital, or, we can create those conditions. But as individuals, we have a responsibility towards finding our own happiness and meaning. And, maybe it doesn't float our boat where our end product ends up. You're like, okay, great. But maybe it's the fact that I get to go to this job. I don't have to go to this job. I get to go to this job and it provides me benefits and pay and the things that are going to allow me to do things for my children or my mother, or things that I couldn't, otherwise do. Or maybe I don't find a lot of meaning in this process, but I do find meaning in the relationships I have at work and how we show up for each other every day. So it's not just a leader's job to provide
Right.
that. You also have to frame it. I love that word you use. How do you frame this in your mind? And one of the things that I do with my coaching clients is I ask them to examine their language of I have to versus I get to.
Get to. Yeah, absolutely. And we find out that it's a lot more of, it's not just about us. So the opportunity that we have at work is not just about us. We're part of something larger and we can be there for those around us. But then also too, on the home side, somebody being able to, let's say, get out of their loader at the end of a shift, or get off the assembly line and out the door at the end of the shift and say, today I just bought that new bicycle for my niece or my daughter or my son, and just reframing that life is not just about the one I see in the mirror. it's
That's
about all
exactly
of those
right.
around us. Yeah.
That's exactly right. One of my favorite projects. So that's about, giving back to those around us. And Marty Seligman, the father of positive psychology, you're like, if there's one thing that would help me with my well-being, what would it be? He's like, go out and do something for somebody. Do something nice for somebody. You know, that serves us as well. But I was always took safety very seriously. And when you talk about your home life, I stumbled upon this idea where we created safety calendars that were based on the artwork of the people in the plant. So they had a little contest. Their kids up to 12 could, draw posters of what they thought was safe. And then we made a yearly calendar and featured all that artwork. And what that did was subtly told people, like, I have people outside of here that I need to go home safely to.
Hmm.
And that's another subtle reframe you
Right.
can do to remind people of why you get to go there.
Yes, and be able to go home safe every day. Now, we've talked about books, and I want to get into your new book and talk about the More framework. But what or were there a couple of books you can share with us that really catapulted you forward or moved you down the line and put some wind in your sails?
Yeah, I will tell you, I learned a lot of the principles that I talk about from experiences. Organizational psychologists through my career had moved more towards the service industry. We didn't have, psychiatrists and psychologists in industrial too much. So I learned a lot of this along the way, but I did leave Rolls Royce and go back to school at Penn and get a master's in applied positive psychology. And there, my eyes were just opened up to so much of the research that sort of backed the way I was getting results. So, Jane Dutton, Energize Your Workplace, amazing. I recommend it to all my coaching clients. Wish I had had it while I was still, running things. It's science-based, but it has a lot of practical applications. The Resilience Factor by Dr. Karen Rivich talks about how we respond when things go wrong and how you can test your assumptions so you respond appropriately. I would have gone so much further in my career had I had that earlier.
Yes.
So those two are super impactful, and I would love people to get their hands on those earlier rather than later.
Yeah, that's good. And that applied psychology, we don't often think, I think, in the everyday of living of just all of the thinkers that are around us trying to make our life better. And what was can you share with us a takeaway that really turned the light switch on for you from, I guess, the value of that applied psychology and how it actually would make the workplace and life at home and at work better?
Yeah. So there's this concept that is studied by University of Michigan, University of North Carolina, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson as well, about high quality connections. And those are those micro moments where we have the chance to interact with another human being, and energy is exchanged during those. And both people come away feeling seen and heard. And it actually creates positive spirals of energy. So, it happens regardless of your rank on the org chart or how long you've known another person. And so, if you understand the science of high quality connections in those micro moments, you literally inject energy all around you. And, you want it to be positive. So it can be as simple a moment as, I'm going through TSA and, the guy's looking at your passport, your license, he's looking at like, I don't know, 20 a minute or whatever. And you can
Mhm.
say, hey, how's your day going? You know, or I really appreciate you keeping us safe, or, just something that lets them know that they're seen and valued. I'm not going to have a long term relationship with this person, right?
No.
But I have
Yeah.
just like, I remembering this concept, just like they perk up. You have a beautiful smile. Thank you for acknowledging me, and then you feel good and they feel good. So, culture in our organizations is not about those big grand gestures. It's about those micro moments. And if you're aware that they exist and you make use of them, you are going to build trust and collaboration and psychological safety. And you know what? It doesn't cost anything to do.
That's right. And we have no color without light. So we can bring some light and some color to those around us. So let's dive into that new book that you have. And More is Better. And I know there's more to the title. We'll get into that. What exactly is that More framework? And how does that meaning, optimism, and relationship directly drive operational excellence as the outcome?
Yes. So my impetus to write this book was, as I said, many of the organizational researchers really spend time in the professional environments and not necessarily the industrial. So I wanted to take these very powerful concepts that these brilliant researchers are putting out there and translate those to people who lead on concrete, not just carpet. Because it looks a little different. My whole career was in those situations. The concepts apply, but the reactions and how you translate them may look a little bit different in those environments and with those workforces. So, based on my experience and what I learned about all the research from that program, I put together this framework. And so it's more before E, meaning, optimism, and relationships are what drive excellence. So if you focus on those pillars, you get excellence in operations and outcomes. And it's a very practical guide. The end of every chapter starts with how you can do a little more today. It's very rememberable, which I think is important too.
Yes.
Whether you're a first line supervisor, a middle manager, or an executive.
Well, it's so important to know what we can bring to the table and have the mindset. So can you talk about the mindset that you would love to see in someone who has read this book and can take these valuable tools back to their workplace?
What I want people to understand is that people try to demand excellence. And at the end of the day, you can't demand excellence, but you can create the environment for it to happen, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I want people to realize is reading this book is I have the tools to create a culture where people thrive and therefore so does the business.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just have case study after case study of leading operations and creating cultures that drove very hard metrics. That rubber business I was talking about, after 3 years, we took injuries down 74%, defects down 93%, improved profitability by 50%. Who wouldn't want those sorts of results? And yes, we were implementing lean processes, but we were creating the foundation where it wasn't just the people in the office who were contributing to the success of the business. It was every single person who walked through the door.
Yes. And being able to, for having everyone within that organizational chart to be able to realize, wow, I can really affect change, bring value, not only in my small team, but it ripples out. And what a wonderful picture of that. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a comment section and we would love to hear from you. Maybe there's a book that really touched your life or a process at work, maybe a revelation, a light that came on and you thought, wait a second, I'm far more valuable than I realized. Now, Kathy, as they're thinking of a comment or typing something in there, please let us know how our listeners can get in touch with you.
Yes, I would love to hear from our listeners and learn how I can help you. The best way to do it is to go to my website, which is more4leaders.com. And there you can get in touch with me if you want to know how I can work with your teams and help them be more effective, advise leaders at all levels. It has both my books there. It has the More Mentor, where you can go in and ask questions of my books.
Nice.
So if you're on third shift and you're like, oh, I got this conflict between two employees, go in and ask it, what would you do? And it's based on my books. And you got to realize, though, my books are based on a lot of experience and super smart scientists.
Nice.
So all of that's available at
Wow.
more4leaders.com, the number
That's
4.
that is an impressive sounding tool of being able to troubleshoot the human factor in the equation. And I love how you have these tools and these books, and then too, your education. You hold an MBA on the business side and a Master of Applied Positive Psychology, which is a new term for me that I discovered as preparing and in this interview. So, how do those two distinct lenses maybe come together? Perhaps there might be a collision when you're evaluating a company's performance.
So for me, it's like I say, there's a lot of things that go into the numbers. It could be the markets you're in, it could be your cycle, your position in the growth cycle, it could be all those things. But the collision is when you walk through an organization and you feel the energy. And this is a place where people are not afraid to speak up and not afraid to contribute. And you see them standing at the information boards, leading meetings, leading problem solving things. There's just so many indications that this business utilizes their most important resource, which is their people.
Wow. I can't believe how much time on the clock we've covered. This has been such a great conversation, and we've got to dig into this a little bit more. We're kind of on the home stretch. We've got about 15 minutes or so left, but just as you're talking, and ladies and gentlemen at home, as you're listening, and even for Kathy yourself, I have a whole lot of questions left on my teleprompter script here that we are not going to get to at all, but what a great conversation so far. And I'm thinking about there's companies obviously of different sizes, but that would also be there's companies of different mindsets. And some people are just focused. They want to grow. They might not know how to grow. How do we communicate, or how do you communicate rather the why to that management team or to their supervisors of here is a key to you finding that recipe to the secret sauce that is actually going to turn your ship?
Yeah. So the why is, quite honestly, we're responsible for how many ever lives we're
Yeah.
leading, right? We're responsible, for their financial well-being, which happens through the performance of the company. So sometimes you have to make hard decisions. I don't want anybody out there to think this is rainbows and unicorns and, we can just come in and love everybody to better results, right? That's not it. So there's a high level of responsibility. There's a high level of accountability, but I think that accountability partnered with compassion is the best possible formula, which means a little bit of tough love from time to time. We didn't get those results, right, of injuries down 74% and defects better by 93% and profitability by 50% by not having high expectations, right? We had high expectations of people, but we also gave them the support and the feedback and the tools they needed to achieve those high expectations. So, this all sounds very soft. It's not soft at all. It's just having high expectations so that you can have high performance, but people maintaining their dignity along.
Right. And so then did you find some leaders who brought you in to coach them or counsel them to say you don't actually just need a pivot. You have to, if you want different results, you have to stop doing things the way you've been doing them for the last 10 years?
Absolutely. Yeah, all the time. The operations that I led, I always had wonderful teams, that we developed together, we learned together, we led together. But what I want people to recognize who are listening to this is no matter what level you are in the organization, you have the ability to create a culture that moves in a more positive direction. And it happens through those micro moments, right? It happens through what you recognize, what you attend to, what you do over and over again. So that's that's a super important lesson for us to learn. We all have the ability to make life better for those who are around us, regardless of the bigger circumstances.
Yes. And so then what about the why for that frontline team where they can actually connect with the meaning of their work rather than feeling maybe micromanaged or just another cog in the wheel?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of things, right? It's first of all making them partners in the business, giving them the information to know whether they succeeded or failed,
Yeah.
that day. And if we didn't meet the objectives, what's the lesson learned? Not the punishment, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah, and that is key to know that we're going to let's learn together. Let's have this as a teachable moment. What is one belief about leadership that you held early in your career that you have changed, partially changed or adapted your mind about today?
So I think early in my leadership, I was focused on the fact that I give trust freely. Okay. And so I feel like that's the best way to build relationships. And you have my trust until you give me a reason not to trust you. Then it's super hard to get that trust back.
Yeah.
But what I've learned along the way is not everybody has that same belief. And so I had to learn that, in many places and organizations, I had to earn others' trusts. And, trust is efficient, trust is productive. It's all those things. So getting to a place where people trusted me was really important to do the hard work that we had to do. But I learned that everybody's different and not everybody gives it freely. With some people, you have to earn it.
Yes, and paying the price to earn that. Trust is such a valuable resource in our lives. And now another T word that we could use is timing, and that's a massive challenge for operation timing. How do you handle the maybe the deep-seated, not so deep-seated, but still resistance to change when you literally cannot slow down the pace of the business to fix it?
You have to. You have to find time to work on the bigger issues, or you will just continue to fix the same symptoms over and over again with band aids. So, we did all kinds of creative things, Probably the chances you're working so many hours and all that is because you're not fixing problems, right? You're
Yeah.
reworking things, people are working under pressure. So, how I usually started was I said, everybody has to be involved in continuous improvement. So figure out the best way for that to happen. Even with like my office workforce, they were like, oh, we don't have time. I'm like, everybody in here is going to spend 10% of their time on making the business better, not just working in the business, but working on the business. And, at first there was like all this gnashing of teeth and,
Yes.
we can't do it and blah, blah, blah. 3 years later, they wouldn't give up that time for anything in the world because what they found was that investment of time made the other 90% so much more effective. And we could do the bigger things. We could grow the business. We could take care of our customers better. We could fix quality. So that's how I did it there. In the plants, everybody attended performance meetings. Everybody in those performance meetings, we did some problem solving, right? And we also, or we just kept a board of, this little thing is bugging me and it's causing that. And we just fix them and write them off. So people are like, oh, people are listening to me and fixing these things. And sometimes I would pull people off the line or keep them early or after if they were willing to do that to help us really get into and solve the problems. So people don't think they have the time. And I would challenge to say that's the worst decision you can make because
Yeah.
you are just, that's the definition of insanity is keep doing the same things and expecting different results.
Right. Well, that's good. And that timing and that trust, they're so critical. And as we're wrapping up, I wanted to ask, what is your advice for those mid-level operators or mid-level operation leaders who might feel maybe stuck, a little squeezed between aggressive corporate expectations from above and then those frontline realities from below?
Yeah. And that's where most of us, I mean, we almost always have a boss, right? Even if
Yes,
you're a
right.
CEO, you've got
Yeah.
stockholders or
Yes,
right,
that's
other
right.
stakeholders. So we all have bosses. And I worked, Michael, in some pretty sometimes less than optimal, we'll just say it that way, environments where I was under a ton of pressure and not being treated how I wanted, you know, how I how I would want to. But I always tried to serve as a buffer and not an amplifier and absorb that pressure so that my teams could run in such a way that we flourished and we did a great job. And getting results is always your best calling card,
Right.
right? But not amplifying some of the toxicity, the, treating, again, it's like the golden rule, treat others how you would like to be treated.
Right.
And again, it's those high expectations and compassion. It's like you have to give feedback to the people who are holding everyone else back. And sometimes that involves tough love, and sometimes that involves moving people who aren't getting with the program. It's not just about being nice, right?
Yeah.
You've got to give feedback. You have to realize what the overall objective is, but you can do it by rippling humanity. You don't have to do it in ways that are mean-spirited or degrading to other people. And when you recognize people for their contributions, you're going to build loyalty and trust, and they're going to give of their discretionary effort to you.
Yeah, well, that's good. And then that leading those operations sometimes does take that emotional or personal toll. So then how does one build that resilience and emotional stamina in their leadership without causing them to take those problems home or maybe burn out?
Yeah, that's a big deal. And that's sort of how you frame things in your mind, and being able to recognize that, develop those optimistic characteristics in yourself that let you know that the challenges and things that you have are not going to be permanent and pervasive. You are responsible to take care of yourself. So find that joy at work, find the joy outside of work, no matter how small, and stay in gratitude. If you can, there's so many interventions about if you can recognize 3 good things every day and write
Yes.
those down, some of those things that just seem overwhelming and awful, they tend to melt away. Sometimes on a challenging day, the best I could come up with was, well, I'm grateful I didn't have a flat tire on the way home.
Right. Yes.
And
Yes,
then other days it
absolutely.
was much more profound, but there are so many interventions out there to help you. But I also say making your little world you're responsible for a better place, you'll get better results, and that takes some of the pressure off,
Yes,
you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I had a conversation with one leader months ago when we were starting out on 5 a.m. podcast, and he talked about sharing those 3 gratitude things with his team in the morning so that they too could respond with even one.
I would even hit my introverts who don't
Nice.
readily share. It's like everybody's got to come up with one thing you're grateful for. I don't care how small it is or seemingly insignificant. And it just lifts the mood.
Yeah,
It just lifts the
absolutely.
mood. Yeah.
Yes, that's wonderful. And what a practical, easy thing we can do. And it puts wind in our own sails when we think of things that we can be grateful for. And so, Kathy, I'm grateful for this practical, I'll say, masterclass in leadership today. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights with us on 5 a.m. podcast.
Thanks, Michael. It's been my pleasure.
Yes, what a wonderful conversation. And let's mention your website one more time before we sign off.
Yeah. More4leaders.com. And it's the number 4.
Good. We will make sure that's in our show notes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing out the show. And of course, all the links that we've talked about today, the LinkedIn information, it's all going to be in our show notes. Head over there. And if you do want to support a 5 a.m. podcast a little bit more, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast. You can find some different levels of support. We love those virtual cups of coffee as well as the actual ones that I'm about to have. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Kathy, thank you for being here. Please, until next time, remember, when we seize our day, we seize our futures, and get out there and enjoy those beautiful sunrises and sunsets and all those wonderful adventures in between. I'm Michael Klassen, and I will see you on the next 5 a.m. podcast. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com.